Everybody wants the same thing, don't they?
Don't they? Everybody wants a happy end.
They wanna see the game on Saturday.
They wanna be somebody's friend.
Everybody wants their families protected.
Oh, yeah.
We want shelter from the storm. We don't need to fight each other. What we need, solidarity.
Welcome to Human Rights Day 2021 under the theme Equality, Reducing Inequalities, Advancing Human Rights. This year's Human Rights Day theme centers on equality as the solution to provide opportunities within and access to a fairer and more inclusive society. Under our generic call to action, Stand Up for Human Rights, it emphasizes the importance of equality, keeping the COVID-19 pandemic context as a backdrop. The United Nations is pleased to partner with the European Union Delegation and the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative to host this year's annual Human Rights Day Lecture and Youth Speakers Bureau today, December 10, 2021. I am your host, Emprezz Golding, and today it is my honor to guide these proceedings. Young people have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. This includes their access to education, as data indicates that hundreds of thousands of young people's rights to an education has been compromised. Further, the EU-funded Spotlight Initiative indicates increased reports of family violence and violence against women and girls, signaling that young people remain at increased risk of human rights violations. Once again, we are pleased to partner with the Spotlight Initiative, the world's largest targeted effort to end violence against women and girls, another infringement on human rights that is plaguing the world today. Please remember to share today's Human Rights Day event with a friend or two and invite them to join the conversation using the hashtag #UNJamaica and #EUInJamaica. Dr. Garry Conille has over 20 years of experience in the United Nations and international development community. Prior to the appointment as resident coordinator in Jamaica, Dr. Conille served as resident coordinator in Burundi, and before that as Undersecretary General for Programs and Operations with the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. We now welcome Dr. Garry Conille, United Nations resident coordinator in Jamaica and the Bahamas.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, today we mark the 73rd anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that played a crucial role in a changing world. It established that wherever we live, whatever our circumstances, our place in society, our gender or sexual orientation, our race or religion or belief, we are all equal in human rights and in dignity. When the world's nation adopted the Universal Declaration in 1948, they also acknowledged the diversity of the cultures and political systems. In the 73 years since the Declaration was adopted, many nations have made great progress in making human rights a human reality. Step by step, barriers that once prevented people from enjoying the full measure of liberty, the full experience of dignity, and the full benefits of humanity have disappeared. In many places, racist laws have been repealed. Legal and social practices that relegated women to second-class status have been abolished. The ability of religious minorities to practice their faith freely have been secured. In most cases, this progress was not easily won. People fought and organized and campaigned in public squares and public spaces to change not only laws, but hearts and minds. And thanks to that work of generations, from millions of individuals whose lives were once narrowed by injustice, they are now able to live more freely and to participate more fully in the political, economic, and social lives of their communities. Now, there is still, as we all know, so much more to be done to secure that commitment, that reality, and progress for all people. This year's Human Rights Day theme relates to equality. Now, everybody has an idea of what equality means. It's the state of being equal in status, rights, or opportunities. It's about fairness, justice, and non-discrimination. It's something that we recognize as inherently good and desirable. But the question remains, what does it mean exactly when we talk about it in the same sentence as human rights? The fact is that the very first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states unequivocally that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Simply put, it's difficult to have one without the other. If people are living in an unequal society, it is highly unlikely that their human rights are being respected. Remember, human rights are universal. They apply to everybody, regardless of who they are or where they're from. Now, what makes this year unique in its importance is the fact that the global COVID-19 crisis, which has exacerbated pockets of poverty, rising inequalities, structural and entrenched discriminations, and other gaps in human rights protection, makes progress even more difficult. As countries come together to build back better, we will need to close these gaps and advance human rights to ensure that global recovery leads to a world that is fairer, more resilient, just, and sustainable. Now, Human Rights Day is an opportunity to reaffirm the importance of equal human rights in rebuilding the world we want, with global solidarity and shared humanity. Now, what better opportunity to give the floor to our young people? This is why we have decided to support the creation of a United Nations Youth Speakers Bureau that provides a high-level visibility opportunity for youth voices within Jamaica and the Bahamas on human rights and the intersecting impacts of the pandemic. At this critical moment of our common history, it is extremely important that our young people be heard and participate in decisions that have impact on their lives. If we as decision makers are to be effective in our decision making and build greater trust and harmony across our institutions, we need to listen to our youth. Human Rights Day is an opportunity for us to recognize the incredible work that was done before us and to reflect on the incredible days ahead. I call on all of us to take this opportunity to think about what each of us can do as individuals and within our communities to forward human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Conille. And now, we turn our attention to a video message by Michelle Bachelet, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights.
The past 2 years have painfully demonstrated the intolerable cost of soaring inequalities. Equality is at the heart of human rights. That doesn't mean we must all look the same, think the same, or act the same. Quite the opposite. It means that we embrace our diversity and demand that all be treated without any kind of discrimination. That no matter who we are, who we love, or where we live, we have equal opportunities to live in dignity and to pursue our dreams. That from the moment we are born, anywhere on this planet, we have the same rights to life, health, and education, to speak our minds without fear, to enjoy our days in a healthy environment. All of us. Equality is about empathy and solidarity, about understanding that as a common humanity, our only way forward is to work together for the common good. But the inequalities inflamed by COVID-19 are pushing us backwards. It is about time we push back and bring them down. On this Human Rights Day, I invite you to join me in lending your name and your efforts to equality, so that we can recover better, fairer, and greener from this crisis. so that we can rebuild societies that are more resilient and sustainable, so that we can stand up for human rights for all.
Mr. Frederick Ekfeldt is the Deputy Head of Mission, Minister Counselor at the European Union Delegation to Jamaica, Belize, the Bahamas, Cayman Islands, and Turks and Caicos. He's also the head of the Political Press and Information section at the delegation. We now welcome Mr. Frederick Ekfeldt.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. The European Union is committed to supporting democracy and human rights in keeping with its founding principles of liberty, democracy and respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. Current global challenges such as climate change and the Covid-19 pandemic have shown that threats to human rights can come in unexpected ways. For example, climate change is affecting and has the potential to affect people and their fundamental rights to life, water, sanitation, food and health. COVID-19 is impacting the right to health, life, education, among others. Recognizing that these threats have a disproportionate impact on persons in vulnerable situations and are deepening pre-existing inequalities, the European Union reaffirms its commitment to prioritizing those that are most at risk of marginalization, stigmatization, sexual and gender-based violence, and other forms of abuse. Additionally, we commit to advancing the safety and security of human rights defenders who are working to create more just and equal societies. Our commitment is laid out in the European Union Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy 2020-2024, which speaks to protecting and empowering individuals, building resilient, inclusive and democratic societies, promoting a global system for human rights and democracy, addressing new technologies, opportunities and challenges, and delivering by working together. This is a time for solidarity and global cooperation through multilateral efforts. This is why the European Union is pleased to partner with the United Nations and the governments of Jamaica and the Bahamas for this year's observance of Human Rights Day under the theme Equality, Reducing Inequalities, Advancing Human Rights. This is in line with Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Reducing inequalities means advancing human rights, which is essential for sustainable development and at the heart of the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm also pleased to see the broad engagement of young people in today's celebration, for they are critical to addressing the emerging threats and as such must be present in all fora where solutions are being sought. For we know that the solutions of tomorrow will come from empowered youth and exchanges of best practices among like-minded persons with different backgrounds and experiences. I therefore look forward to today's interventions from all our esteemed speakers and wish you a pleasant viewing.
Let's now welcome the Honorable Leslie Campbell, State Minister in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade.
Jamaica is pleased to join the international community in commemorating Human Rights Day 2021 under the theme Equality, Reducing Inequalities, Advancing Human Rights. The observance of this day each year, coming as it does at the end of the 16 days of activism against violence against women, is a potent reminder of the imperative of keeping human rights at the forefront of our agenda for the benefit of all in society. The pursuit of equality, as one of the foundations of human rights, impels us to ensure equal treatment and respect for all human beings and creates an obligation on all countries to advance human rights in the interest of their citizens. It is understood that adherence to the principles of human rights, once promoted and respected, will result in more peaceful, just, and equal societies. Jamaica's historical journey has led us on a path of global advocacy in defense of human rights. From its promotion of the concept of an International Year for Human Rights, which was observed in 1968, to the pivotal role it played in bringing an end to the apartheid regime in South Africa in the early years of our nationhood, Jamaica has given expression to its commitment to advance the principle of equality in human rights. Through the good offices of the various agencies of the multilateral system, such as the United Nations, Jamaica continues today to demonstrate strong support for efforts geared towards the equal application of rights and justice for the oppressed, particularly people of African descent. Most recently, during the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Jamaica reiterated a call for reparatory justice for the defendants of the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. We will continue to advocate for this outcome as another means of reducing inequalities which have resulted from a history of slavery, a colonial past, indebtedness, and economic weaknesses. Jamaica's ratification of 7 of the 9 core international human rights and its acceptance of 120 of 170 recommendations emanating from its 2020 Universal Periodic Review serve as demonstrable evidence of its commitment to advancing the rights and dignity of all Jamaicans. Here at home, equality of rights is guaranteed to all citizens. The Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms guarantees the right to equality before the law, the right to equitable and humane treatment by any public authority, and the right to freedom from discrimination. We all have a role to play in the promotion of equality and justice for all. As we commemorate Human Rights Day 2021, we call on all Jamaicans to defend, promote, and protect the rights of all persons, no matter their station in life, as the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Let our differences serve not as the basis for inequality, but rather as the means by which we promote diversity and uphold the ideals of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which declares that human rights are universal and are to be enjoyed by all people, no matter who they are or where they live. Jamaica is committed to this realization.
Thank you, Minister. And now the Ashay Company was founded in 1993, and it is a non-governmental, internationally acclaimed edutainment and theatre arts company in the English-speaking Caribbean. The entity is committed to the preservation and renewal of the Jamaican Afro-Caribbean culture using edutainment. You know what that is, right? Educating while entertaining. The company has received over 25 local and international awards, accolades, keys to world cities, and mayor proclamations in celebration and honor of their work. Viewers, brace yourself for a captivating presentation by the Ashay Company.
From the beginning of time, the cry of justice has always been, am I not a friend or a brother?
Am I not a sister or a mother?
What's good for the goose
Is good for the gander.
One thing I know for sure, you can't just sit in your ivory tower and decide who has rights and who does not. Unless everybody has rights.
Unless everybody has rights,
Everybody is wrong.
Man. Yo, gigs is just gone, say, man.
I'm tired of my friend just had dead, so from good man bullet.
Yo, I feel like the money that be one of the biggest ball of them on the block, brother. Yo, you know how much Messi and Usain Bolt there one of them dead, and nobody no get to see the star life in them.
People have starlight in them?
You know what I mean?
Not really. Vicky, stop. Stop what? Vicky, stop. You have starlight in you? Vicky, you know say another day though. Alright, but I understand what I'm saying. It's like we can only see the dream, but something might keep it from reaching. Stop. It's like we can only see the star, but enough things that keep it far from the star. Like us and Buggy when we are drive car. Jhannel star and seeing her. You know say a joker? I'm done.
She not take nothing serious. I know that's the worst part, you know. I went and the police them scraped me off of the road, you know, and I question me. Like say me do something wrong.
Like we're not on the right sir. Let them just feel like them can fling you anyway.
Like garbage.
You think that's funny? You really think that's funny?
Go easy on her, brother.
She don't mean anything by it. Vicky, behave yourself now. Sorry, but that's how I deal with things when it get too serious. Can't manage all of that. So you know, my child like it so and say stupid things. That's not what I was going to say.
Yes, a fufu thing sometimes.
Sometimes, but that's just my coping mechanism. That's what my counselor said at least.
Well, clearly, you need more counseling.
Yo.
My youth, me have friends who get gunned down by gunman on the street, you know. And you want to come to him say, me must take easy for she because she wants some psychiatric help.
Me understand that, but that don't mean nothing better. All of that never called.
Attitude never called for.
Hey, everybody need to relax. Just because you hurt no means you need to go around and hurt everybody now.
Me just not like to see people unfair.
I understand that. But who unfair?
You! And you! You what unfair?
Oh, so everybody unfair except you?
And just to make you know, not because she get psychiatric help or counseling means there's something wrong with her.
Exactly, especially in the pandemic too.
A lot more people need support and counseling than you think.
Look, I never mean it that way. I just say that same. I never mean it like that.
Alright, so you see how easy it is to disrespect and disempower people with what you say.
Granny always say, Jackass said the world on level.
What that mean?
It means I know everybody have the same looks.
But that not right. It's the injustice for me.
Listen, uptown, downtown, black, you could have even white, everybody get treated differently. It come like we alone not have no rights.
No, I can never understand it, the way the system planned. There's no hope, no chance, no loophole, no escape for the suffering man. 'Cause every time I lift my head above water, try to save myself from drown, there's an overnight scheme all worked out, designed to keep me down. Putting up resistance, I'm gonna work it out. You know I'm putting up resistance, I'm gonna work it out. Yes, you know I'm putting up resistance, I've got to work it out. Ooh, putting up resistance, I've got to work it out. You know I'm putting up resistance, I'm gonna work it out. You know I'm putting up resistance.
Marion Bethel is an international human rights expert from the Bahamas. In July 2014, Ms. Bethel was awarded the 11th CARICOM Triennial Award for Women for her noted contribution to the field of gender and development in the Caribbean. She was elected to the committee of the UN Convention on the Elimination on all forms of discrimination against women in June 2016 and currently serves on the committee. Help me welcome Ms. Marion Bethel.
This year's human rights theme centers on reducing inequalities, advancing human rights, and equality as the solution for the provision of opportunities and outcomes within and access to a fairer and more inclusive society. Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, made the following statement in regard to gender equality. Gender equality is more than a goal in itself. It is a precondition for meeting the challenges of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance. This statement is equally resonant for equality in any and every sector of human life and endeavor. Today, I choose to recognize the principles of equality and non-discrimination that anchor each and every human rights treaty or convention. The intertwined principles are essential for the effective protection of human rights as recognized by our national constitutions and regional and international human rights instruments. The principles of equality and non-discrimination are at the core of human rights and serve to reduce historical and current disadvantages. However, discrimination continues to persist worldwide against religious, ethnic, and national minorities, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, migrant persons, older persons, children, women, and LGBTI persons, among others. inequality frustrates people's sense of dignity and self-worth and threatens long-term social development. In combining a portion of the preamble and Articles 1 and 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, it would read, and I quote, "Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in this world, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status." End of quote. I underscore the pronouncement of equal in dignity and rights and what that means, and will return to that shortly. Many people think of human rights and gross violations as an invention of the 20th century, post-World War II, with the prosecution of Nazi war criminals between 1945 and 1949 for gross human rights abuses and crimes against humanity. However, prior to World War II, the issues of human rights, the impact of colonization, racial discrimination, and equality of economic opportunity were ably promulgated by the Pan-African Congress as early as 1900 in London by persons such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida Gibbs Hunt, George Padmore, Nkrumah, and Kenyatta. In 1949, Marcus Garvey, through the establishment of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, became a global proponent of civil and political rights and economic opportunity for Black people in the Caribbean and the Americas. Further, we in the Caribbean have intensified our demands for restitution for both the genocide and dispossession of indigenous peoples in the Americas and the enslavement of African peoples throughout the 17th, 18th, and mid-19th centuries, and the continuing legacy of these violations for both peoples. We also recognize the exploitation of Indian people through the 19th century indentureship system. And so, on this Human Rights Day, I want to pause and acknowledge the continuing struggle of Indigenous and African peoples in the Americas for reparations in recognition of crimes against humanity and the continuing violations of our human rights. I will now resume the thread of equal in dignity and rights as set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration, a global agreement accepted by all states, placed human beings and our human rights at the heart of its agenda. Not the economy, trade, commerce, and geopolitics, but human beings and human rights. The Universal Declaration has since served as the foundation for an evolving system of human rights protections that today focus on vulnerable groups such as persons with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, African descendant peoples, migrant persons, LGBTQI persons, persons living in poverty, the elderly, climate and disaster-related refugees, amongst others. Equality is a central pillar of human rights, and both equality and non-discrimination are inherent, fundamental, and indivisible to human rights. The human rights-based approach of treatment as an equal human being, not equal treatment, provides a point of departure by which equality and non-discrimination can be incorporated into meaningful legal and policy instruments and programs of national action for vulnerable groups. This approach is based on dignity as emphasized in the Universal Declaration, and dignity is meant to reflect the universality, indivisibility, and interrelatedness of all human rights. Equal in dignity and rights is, in my view, the moral imperative or basis for all states to uphold, and by which to measure their laws, policies, and social protections. This human rights-based approach to equality seeks to adopt a specific moral principle into the application of equality through the social redistribution and access to public services, goods, resources, and land. All laws, policies, and programs must work towards substantive equality, which is a key concept in human rights treaties. Substantive equality recognizes the fact that inequality is structural and systemic, and that discrimination can be indirect, and that equality has to be understood in relation to outcomes as well as opportunities for disadvantaged persons. And that equality does not necessarily mean uniform or equal treatment. Thus, substantive equality ensures that the results and outcomes of these laws, policies, and practices do not maintain, but rather alleviate the inherent disadvantage that particular groups experience. Policymakers must take account of the needs of different groups and address the effects of past discrimination, social norms, and power relations that contribute to discrimination and inequality. All states' policies and programs must respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of marginalized and disadvantaged groups, ensuring non-discrimination and equality. COVID-19 has deepened existing inequalities, hitting the poorest and most vulnerable communities the hardest. It has highlighted social and economic inequalities and fragile social safety nets that leave vulnerable communities and persons to bear the brunt of the crisis. At the same time, social, political, and economic inequalities have heightened the impacts of the pandemic. Economically, COVID-19 has significantly increased global and regional unemployment and substantially decreased incomes. COVID-19 also puts at risk the limited progress that has been made on gender equality and women's rights over the past decades. Across every sphere, from gender-based violence against women and girls to sexual and reproductive health services, housing, food security, to social protection, the impacts of COVID-19 are exacerbated for women and girls. Inequalities are also deepening for vulnerable populations in countries with compromised and weaker health systems, and those facing existing humanitarian crises and conflict situations. Refugees and migrants, as well as indigenous peoples, older persons, people with disabilities, and children are particularly at risk of being left behind, and these same groups are often experiencing increased discrimination. Inequalities based on income, sex, age, disability, race, class, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and migration status continue to persist across the world. For example, in regard to migrant persons, governments can promote safe, regular, and responsible migration, including through planned and well-managed policies for people who have left their homes seeking better lives due to climate crisis, earthquakes, war, poverty, and other triggers of migration. Inequality affects us all, no matter where we are from. We simply have to look at the issue of vaccine inequality to realize that until all of us have access to the COVID vaccine, none of us is ultimately safe wherever we are. Economic and social policies need to be universal and pay particular attention to the needs of disadvantaged and marginalized communities. What can we do? We can stand up for human rights and make clarion calls and action for substantive equality. Reducing inequality requires structural and transformative change. Governments must invest more in health, education, social protection, and decent jobs, especially for young people, migrant persons, and other vulnerable communities. We need to promote inclusive and social economic growth. We can ensure substantive equality and reduce inequalities of income if we eliminate discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, especially in regard to women and girls. We need to ensure that developing countries are better represented in decision-making institutions on global issues such as foreign debt, trade, taxation, so that solutions can be more effective, creditable, and accountable. All around the world, in every region, young people are at the forefront in standing up for human rights. At the recent summit on climate crisis in Glasgow, Caribbean youth were present and accounted for in making representations on behalf of Caribbean countries and the world. It is now beyond dispute that climate crisis and injustice caused by human activity has negative impacts on the full enjoyment of human rights. Climate change has profound impacts on a wide variety of human rights, including the rights to life, self-determination, development, food, health, water, sanitation, and housing. With rising sea levels, Caribbean countries and peoples are at significant risk of disappearing. In closing, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights empowers us all. The principles enshrined in the Declaration are as relevant today as they were in 1948. We need to stand up for our own rights and those of others. We can take action in our own daily lives to uphold the rights that protect us all and all human beings. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights sets out a broad range of fundamental rights and freedoms to which all of us are entitled. It guarantees the rights of every individual, everywhere, women, children, and men, without distinction based on nationality, place of residence, gender, national or ethnic origin, religion, language, or any other status. Equality and non-discrimination are more than a goal in themselves. They are a precondition for the meeting of challenges of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance. Equality in dignity and rights for all human beings is everything and more. I thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Ms. Marion Bethel. And we salute you for the work that you have done and continue to do in human rights. Rampant poverty, pervasive inequalities, and structural discrimination are human rights violations and among the greatest global challenges of our time. Addressing them effectively requires measures grounded in human rights, renewed political commitment, and participation, right, of all, especially those most affected. We need a new social contract which more fairly shares power, resources, and opportunities and sets the foundations of a sustainable human rights-based society. To tell you more is 22-year-old Antonette Dennis, a Prime Minister's Youth Awardee for Excellence in Nation Building and is a reporter-producer at Nationwide News Network. Antonette is a youth trainer at UNESCO. Let's hear what Antonette has to say.
Hi everyone, I'm Antonette Dennis, a UNESCO youth trainer tasked to help build institutional capacity on meaningful engagement and to encourage the active participation of young people across all sectors. I grew up in one of the poor parts of rural Jamaica and experienced firsthand what a life riddled with poverty is like. Little food, no running water, and sometimes only enough money to send 1 of 5 children to school. So, ponder on this reality. At this very minute, even more so due to the COVID-19 pandemic, a mother is deciding how she'll ration the little food she has so it can feed her family. Thousands of children are not in school, and vulnerable groups, which include children and youth, women and girls, the LGBTQ community, persons with disabilities, and the list goes on, are constantly hoping to get the relief they need to live. Why? Because rampant poverty is among the biggest challenges faced by people and governments globally. It continues to reproduce itself in vicious cycles, driven by unacceptable levels of inequality. This leaves the poor without quality opportunities to thrive. Hence, this is the reason why reducing poverty is goal 1 of 17 established Sustainable Development Goals. Fixing the problem now requires far more than just talks, consultations, and promises to implement policy. This urgent issue requires action, dedicated resources, and investment in social interventions that are entrenched in human rights and allow for equitable participation across all socioeconomic groups. Data from the World Bank indicate that COVID-19 has increased global poverty significantly and will push 150 million people into extreme poverty by the end of this year. Even those who may have had the chance to escape poverty are less able to do so now because of the challenges brought on by the pandemic. Small island developing states are even more adversely affected, some facing serious challenges to deliver on their commitments to economic and social rights. Some of the major challenges include currency depreciation, a tightened fiscal space, and reduced remittances have stifled many of their key targets. With a global crisis that has left many without proper social protection and has entrenched the discrimination and inequalities that already existed, world leaders and young people are now left at a crossroads. A crossroad where the complexities of the COVID-19 crisis have compounded the socioeconomic challenges of those who are most marginalized and fall at the bottom of the social food chain. So, where do we go from here? What route do we take to achieve widespread equity and development? And whose responsibility will this be to bear? Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has provided a unique opportunity for all tiers of leaders. Navigating a clear path towards an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future is the responsibility of this generation of leaders and stakeholders. A step that, if not taken quickly, can potentially become our biggest downfall. First, we need a new social contract, one that establishes more inclusive global governance, better regulations on finance, and promotes productive capacities in countries most affected. This will help to address poverty and rising inequalities. We also need to move into creating more robust and equitable education systems. This has been stressed repeatedly, and yet many nations still have not gotten it right. UNESCO tells us that learning loss due to COVID-19 has affected 1.3 million learners. This, compounded with unequal opportunities for rural versus urban schools and countless allegations of corruption within the system, has the potential to cripple one of the clearest means of breaking cycles of poverty and achieving social mobility. I've always been a believer that if we fix the issues stifling proper education, then that will create a domino effect. The creation of a more equipped labor force to strengthen the various sectors and bridge the gaps that we're now seeing. Second, states must adopt a human rights-based approach to taxation. This will raise the necessary resources for public investments in basic social services. Measures could include a special services tax and concrete steps to curb illegal financial flows and tax abuse. Third, international financial institutions, multilateral development banks, and transnational corporations have an important role to play in securing and enabling an international environment by stepping up development cooperation. They have an obligation to uphold human rights and contribute to reducing poverty and inequalities. Civil society, youth movements, social movements, and youth-led organizations also have a pivotal role to play in reducing inequalities and advocating for human rights. Many are grassroots agencies and organizations with a unique connection to the people and can achieve great results once the mandates are not derailed by self-greed and political motives. Active, free, and meaningful participation of poor and marginalized communities should be prioritized in the formulation, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of national and international policies aimed at combating poverty. Friends, the 2030 Agenda envisages a world of universal respect for human rights, human dignity, the rule of law, justice, equality, non-discrimination, and respect for race, sex, age, ethnicity, cultural diversity, and of equal opportunities to shared prosperity. With just 9 years to go, there is still so much to do, so many things to change, and importantly, so much that can be achieved. However, such an overhaul cannot be done without our representatives and lawmakers having the political will to create and legislate these types of changes. As young people, we also have a pivotal role to play. We have a duty to offer viable solutions that can usher our countries into the future, to advocate for the causes dearest to us, and doing so with integrity, even in times when we feel helpless. Otherwise, the generations to come will only continue to be shackled by the proverbial poverty and societal blockades, as were their parents and those before them. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to make the bold moves. This is my charge to you for Human Rights Day 2021.
Thank you, Antonette Dennis, and you are right. The time is now to act, right? And we must be bold. The right to development and the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment are central to building a new human rights-based society, and young people must be engaged every step of the way. To tell us more is Accalia Plummer. Accalia is a God-fearing student of Arden High School with a particular interest in international relations, development, and media. With Jeremiah 29:11 echoing in her heart, she strives to be a diligent and worthy ambassador for her family, school, and country. She is the head girl of her institution, the president of the Model United Nations Club, and I'm honored to introduce to you and welcome Accalia Plummer.
Hello everyone, I'm Accalia Plummer. There are two things you'll know about me at the end of this presentation. I'm a foodie and I'm a sociology student. So, our theme, rebuilding Pharaoh, a new social contract with meaningful youth engagement. Okay, how will we tackle this heavy topic? Firstly, it's only right that if I'm going to tell you about rebuilding Pharaoh, I need to say why I believe we need to do so. There's a particular theory by George Becker which explains the retention of the plantocracy system. You know, the white plantation owners, the sugar production system, the blacks, the mulattoes. He believes that in the same way that social stratification was based on ascribed features such as race, color, and gender, the exact same thing transferred to the 21st century. Our social interactions and social mobility in this modern day and age are all dependent on certain features. Thus, you see two sides of Jamaica. On one side, you see a citizen with a $50 million car, and on the other side, you see a citizen having to buy a squeeze of toothpaste at a corner shop. The life chances, the opportunities to advance given to us as Jamaicans are dependent on certain features. Whether you want to view it as class or color, it is all one and the same in Jamaican society. This takes me to the point of actually rebuilding our social contract, which we need to do in order to have meaningful progressions, in order for us to actually prosper as a nation. We need to examine the fine print on our social contract. What does it say about how we interact with one another, how we view one another, how the rulers interact with those they rule, how the person on the bus interacts with the person in the X6, the mores of the society versus the taboos of the society. What do we have in our social contract that is hindering us from experiencing long-term progression? Now, here's when I say that the Sustainable Development Goals serve not only as something to achieve, but guidelines for how we can move from a developing country to a developed country. My favorite dish is spicy chicken Alfredo, and so I'm going to use it to help explain my point. So, one of the most important elements is the pasta, which represents SDG 10, reduced inequalities. The foundation for us to rebuild our social contract and advance as a society. For everyone to contribute to the progression of our society, everyone has to be given the same life chances, which will only happen if we have reduced inequalities. we need to rewrite our social contract. Next, we move on to the seasonings. You know, the garlic powder, onion powder, all-purpose, which represents SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. The development of these in the right areas with the right amounts and placements will guarantee a new and improved social contract. Have you ever taken time to consider why Kingston and St. Andrew and slowly Mobay and St. James are more developed than other parishes? As much as we need financial help and resources, we need intentional development and spending on these three institutions by developing our most important resources. Human. Building on the social skills of our citizens. The best way to do this is by meaningful youth engagement, not only in the manifestos, but in real life, for all decisions and sectors. We are the ones engaged in the social media sites. We are the ones who control popular culture. We have our ears to the ground. If you want to change the society, you need to know the society, and we know the society. We need not only be used for our opinions, but for implementation. Again, we need not only be used for our opinions, but for implementation and execution of policies. Our contribution needs to be written within our social contracts. Lastly, our Alfredo sauce, partnership among all the goals, SDG 17. This is a widespread SDG which binds all the SDGs together, as the Alfredo sauce does. Having partnerships among all sectors of the goals that are including environmental, economic, comfort, justice, human rights, etc., will help place our citizens in better positions to help advance our society. It's all about the domino effect. But the most important fundamental thing to remember is that for this idea to become a successful reality, we must exponentially improve on the trails of each day in order to rebuild our social contract.
There's power in the voice and mind of the youth. Thank you so much, Accalia. And you know I'm the one that always says here in Jamaica, talk up youth, Mr. Talk up youth. Give the youth a voice and allow them to participate. Human rights have the power to tackle the root causes of conflict and crisis by addressing grievances, eliminating inequalities and exclusion, and allowing people to participate in decision-making that affect their lives. Societies that protect and promote human rights for everyone are more resilient societies, better equipped through human rights to weather unexpected crises. In this regard, education is the key. Can you all say it with me? Education is the key. That's right. And with that said, help me welcome Christina Williams. She is the president of the Jamaica Union of Tertiary Students.
Education is the key to success. From me I have been told that particular saying, which is the local vernacular from since I was a child. But today, I am here to challenge that notion on the simple basis that education, if not done right, and done right for all, will actually be the barrier between the youth of Jamaica and the world and their ability to fulfill their fullest potential. Come with me, let's have a conversation. We start off with the thrust back to face-to-face learning. Now, I agree with it somewhat because UNESCO warns that 117 million students around the world are still out of school. And right here in Jamaica, 1.3 billion hours of in-class time was lost because of physical school closures. So yes, we want to transition to face-to-face learning. But I must ask this question. If we had a tablet in every low-income household, and if our telecommunication providers had a reliable and affordable internet access for all, would we be forcing our students back to face-to-face? And I use the word force because right now, as we think about the transition, there isn't much conversations about an option. The flexibility that our young people need to choose between, do I want to engage online, remote, or in the classroom? Why is it important for us to have this flexibility in education, especially when we consider education for all? It is important because when we think about the percentage of the population who have had access to tertiary education, less than 20%, and we think about the fact that we have a 24% unemployment rate for young people, 21% for males, 28% for females, and that we already don't have access to quality and affordable tertiary education, and young people need to work to be able to afford this particular access, why then would we limit their opportunities to do this by saying to them, you need to be in the classroom in a face-to-face format? Why don't you provide this flexibility where our young people can say, I am going to do a job on the side while being able to learn and to advance my education? Then we think about our differently abled students. While we were online, were we able to engage our differently abled students? And as we transition back to face-to-face learning, are there modalities and methodologies being employed to ensure that they're also accessing quality education? Our differently abled students must be enabled. Now, let us consider the different abilities of our young people. We have entrepreneurs, we have innovators, go-getters, creators. Does our education system adequately provide a space for all of those talents and abilities? Or are we creating clogs in a machine that we must leave school, graduate, try most times unsuccessfully to get a job? Or is our education challenging status quos, inspiring us to become innovators, creators, becoming socially aware and socially responsible? I urge government, administrators of our different institutions, even private sector, to work with the students of Jamaica and of the world to decide what type of education system do we need to achieve Vision 2030 as well as the SDGs of the United Nations. We need new funding models where education can be more affordable for young people from low-income households. We need education that reflects the realities that we need more technology in schools, we need more civic engagement and critical thinking in our schools, and we need to also ensure that education prepares us adequately to transition into the labor force. As a student, as a leader of students, I am calling on government, administrators of our different institutions, private sector, and even students to work together to ensure that our education system is more inclusive, that our education system actually caters to the realities of our people as is right now. That through education, we're able to achieve Vision 2030 and the 17 SDGs. But we need funding, we need support, and most of all, we need government, private sector, and other stakeholders to listen to what our students are calling for. We want education to truly be the key to success and not a door that blocks us from the opportunity to fulfill our greatest potential.
We all have a right to safety. And we almost own up that safety thing. Safety from criminals, safety from gunmen. Safety from as far as the security forces and the justice system is concerned. We all must stop allowing people to take our rights away. And we must stop taking away the rights of others.
Yes, having rights is great. Activating your rights by knowing your rights, then acting on your rights is powerful.
With rights come responsibility. This just relates to how we deal with things for ourselves. We talk to ourselves and we take action. We talk to one another and we get the help we need around these rights.
Make we give this thing a mental oversight, where every human being will operate in the light of human rights and lift each other up in the darkness of the night when we hear each other's plight. Yo, that body not true. Talk truth.
Environmental degradation, including climate change, pollution, and nature loss, disproportionately impacts persons, groups, and peoples in vulnerable situations. Jhannel Tomlinson is a PhD candidate and a researcher in the Department of Geography and Geology at the University of the West Indies, Mona, in Jamaica, whose research seeks to assess the readiness of agricultural community-based organizations to advance adaptive action at the local level. She is co-founder of Girls Care and Young People for Action on Climate Change Jamaica and has been engaged as part of the multidisciplinary research teams undertaking adaptation work across Jamaica and other Caribbean countries, including St. Lucia, Grenada, Haiti, and Barbuda.
Not too long ago, if you were to ask a young person about their future, they would tell you about the car they want to drive, the job they want to have, where they want to live, and the countries they would like to visit. Nowadays, while many of these things are still important, the existential crisis of climate change poses a challenge to achieving many of these things because we live in small island countries that have been and continue to be impacted by this climate catastrophe. Hello. I am Jhannel Tomlinson, a scholar activist who has been involved in ongoing work on youth and climate change for the past 6 years. Did you know that young people make up between 45 to 50% of the population of Caribbean countries and are one of the most vulnerable sectors of the population to climate change? Through my engagements with these groups, I have heard, seen, and felt the differential impacts of a changing climate on our young population, including threats to health, education, access to water, and nutritious food. I have seen how the negative impacts of extreme weather events have prevented young people from attending school, affecting their right to an education. I've also seen how issues related to drought and hurricane activity have affected the physical and mental health of children and adolescents and have also affected again the availability and accessibility to safe food. Climate change is therefore what you can call a wicked problem, affecting the access of youth to their fundamental human rights. As our entire lives are and continue to be shaped by the climate crisis, as youth, we therefore have a unique position in this climate justice movement. There have been increasing efforts among youth across the Caribbean who have been engaged in activities that seek to direct action to protect our homes, land, and identities. These activities have included capacity building trainings, mentorship programs, awareness campaigns, projects, and the development of innovative solutions that seek to educate, engage, and facilitate action for the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular, Goal 13. These efforts have been especially supported by United Nations organizations who continue to see youth as important stakeholders in the ongoing climate change conversations. While efforts are ongoing, we need more partners and stakeholders to come on board the climate justice train and provide support, as a lot more needs to be done. There needs to be better engagement of especially rural youth, as well as those within the LGBTQ+ and disabled communities who are often left behind in many of the current efforts. There needs to be greater recognition of climate change as not just a technical issue about greenhouse gases, but a justice issue, and one that requires inclusion of individuals from all walks of life. As young people, we have the right to a livable future. The fate of our generation and that of our offspring lies in our hands as youth. And this is why we must act, and we must act now.
Beijing Rodgers is from the beautiful island nation of the Bahamas. At 12 years, she began a youth-led organization to empower young people to create their spiral effect in society called IoT. It's our turn. And in 2020, she was a National Youth Development Officer at the Bahamas Red Cross. She created workshops within the affected areas of Hurricane Dorian for young people to express themselves due to the devastation, called Using Art for Mental Healing for Mental Health Awareness Month. To tell us more about the right to holistic health is Beijing Rodgers from the Bahamas.
Close your eyes and imagine. Darkness, loud sounds of thunder, lightning, rain. Imagine the roof of your house caved in, objects thrown all around the room. And you look outside and you see the water rising, approaching the height of your windowsill. Dead bodies floating and your heart racing, wondering if this will be the last time you see your family or draw your last breath. This is the narrative of hundreds of young people who have experienced Hurricane Dorian in September 2019, which hit two of our islands in the Bahamas, Abaco and Grand Bahama. This is one of the strongest, longest lasting hurricanes and considered the most deadliest hurricane of the 21st century. I am Beijing Rodgers, from the beautiful island nation of the Bahamas. I served my country as a humanitarian, a youth activist, and a life coach. At 4 years young, I joined the workforce, and my first job was passing out crayons to the marginalized Haitian youth in an impoverished village in the Dominican Republic. It was in this moment when I realized the meaning of poverty. As I got older, I developed a passion for wanting to help the less fortunate youth by starting my nonprofit youth-led organization at 12 years young, where we served and empowered young people to find the solutions we face in society, to take action and execute them. Particularly when Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas, I headed the child-friendly space called the Love Tent, in this biggest shelter housing 800 plus survivors. It was then when I heard the heartbreaking stories of the youth who swam, tread water, and ran for their lives during the 220-mile-per-hour storm at a Category 5. Have you been through a traumatic experience as a young person or a child? An experience that has left you without food for days, a mother, a father, a best friend, or a roof over your head? Or have you ever dealt with isolation, no social interactions with classmates and friends, struggling through suicidal thoughts, or having sporting and recreational activities being constantly canceled? Well, I'm here to share 2 reasons why it is beneficial for young people to receive access to mental health assistance in times of disaster and COVID-19. If trauma isn't dealt with at a young age, it travels with you throughout adulthood. Therefore, this conversation cannot be ignored. I would firstly like to address the inequality of access to mental health assistance to the marginalized youth. According to the Mental Health Foundation, 50% of mental health problems are established by age 14, 75% by age 24, and 70% of adolescents who experience mental health problems have not had appropriate interventions at an early age. And the consequences, if left alone, create problematic disorders such as anxiety, depression, unresolved anger, and hopelessness. Once this settles without treatment, the majority of these young people's lives become meaningless. This is seen in absence of school and completing schoolwork, grieving friends and family that have not been found, some having to take the role as parent over their younger siblings, adjusting to living with strangers due to homes being destroyed, and amidst all of that, trying to cope with their new reality. Additionally, the conversation of mental health needs to be normalized due to the gravity of its effect on the young human mind. bringing it to my home country, the Bahamas, my team and I from the Youth Department of the Bahamas Red Cross hosted a mental health workshop tour to 3 of our islands, Nassau, Abaco, and Grand Bahama, emphasizing using art for mental healing for the youth struggling with post-hurricane and COVID trauma. Most of the testimonials from these events have resulted in realizing how negatively they were affected and how important it was to be given the opportunity to confront their trauma. And for most of them, it has been the first time where they have received access to a mental health professional. To bring light to the need for mental health assistance for the young people, my team and I partnered with these young workshop attendees to put their art and coffee table books to be sold to the nation. This initiative has 2 purposes. 1, to normalize mental health, and 2, to promote the voices of the youngest in our society. The Bahamas ratified the Convention for the Rights of Children in 1990 and its 2 optional protocols in 2015, and the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in 2008, and the Convention on the Rights to Health in 2008. They all state that health is a fundamental human right, indispensable for the exercise of other human rights. So the Bahamas is obligated to do our best to provide mental health assistance for our youth. Imagine if this was you or your child. We must remember it is young people's human right to receive mental health assistance in times of disaster and COVID-19, no matter their creed, race, age, or gender. So let's normalize the accessibility to mental health assistance, especially for those vulnerable to natural disaster nations and COVID-19. No young person must be left behind in the fight for mental wellness.
Sadly, far too many young men and women in Jamaica have and continue to lose their lives to crime and violence. To call us to change on this Human Rights Day is Fabian Morris, an exemplary youth leader, President of the Youth Arm of the United Nations Association of Jamaica, Deputy Vice President of Services and Special Projects at the Mona Guild. Welcome, Fabian Morris.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, lend me your ears. Growing up in a volatile community, I have lost several friends, many forced to take on the lifestyle of badness due to the lack of opportunities and positive role models in our society. These, including several other factors, have promulgated the high levels of crime and violence in our beloved nation. Ending crime and violence is a key national priority. Now, not just for government only, but for us as the citizens, especially youths, who live in fear that our lives may be cut short simply for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. This is no exaggeration, my friends. Violence is one of the leading causes of death of young Jamaican males. Additionally, 1 in every 4 Jamaican women have experienced sexual violence, and the reports of violence against women and girls have also increased since the pandemic. We know that human rights-based approach has the power to tackle the root causes of conflict and crisis by addressing grievances, eliminating inequalities and exclusion, and allowing people to participate in decision-making that affects their lives. Societies that protect and promote human rights for everyone are more resilient societies, better equipped through human rights to weather unexpected crises such as pandemics and the impacts of the climate crisis. Equality and non-discrimination are key to prevention. So yes, when certain people or groups are excluded or face discrimination, this inequality drives the cycle of conflict and crisis. For us to recover better means strengthening our commitment to human rights and achieving the goals set out in the Sustainable Development Agenda. This must be tackled by highlighting inequalities and working as a country to rid our country of infringements on human rights which adversely affect the progress of our society and exacerbate the inequities that spark violence. Today, I am making a petition to all well-thinking members of our society to end violence and protect those most vulnerable to abuse and mistreatment. Crime and violence is far too prevalent in Jamaica, and it continues to impact the lives and realities of youth, families, and our women and girls in all spaces and from all backgrounds. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, emerging data and reports have shown that there's a sharp increase in all types of violence against our women and girls, particularly domestic violence. Even worse, we know that violence still and too often remains largely unreported due to the impunity, the silence, the stigma, and our damning culture of see and blind, hear and deaf. This mentality is a virus, and we must move swiftly to end it. So as we continue to work to address violence, friends, we must know that violence is not inevitable. There is more evidence, now more than ever. We know that works in preventing and reducing it. We need an all-hands-on-deck approach. We no longer have time for tokenism and photo ops. We need to accelerate justice reform and legal frameworks that are accessible and fair to all Jamaicans. This has to include ensuring services are available and accessible to protect survivors and witnesses, and must include cogent and equitable charges for offenders. We must also work to support a high-quality security response rooted in community policing, human rights policies. We have work to do, my fellow Jamaicans. Finally, as a people, we have to address the many institutional and structural barriers, harmful social norms, patriarchal systems, and negative stereotypes, and last but not least, toxic masculinity that continues to contribute and encourage crime and violence. Violence affects all of us, every one of us. It is clearer that now more than ever, we are all in this together. All members of society are affected, and so we can all be a part of the solution. I therefore admonish everyone in all spaces where you live, where you work, where you play, on the street side, to the boardrooms, and even on social media, to raise your voice as we all work together to try to transform Jamaica and end our culture of crime and violence. Let's do it so young men like myself can have a Jamaican future that we all can be proud of. I thank you.
We're at the end of Human Rights Day 2021. We thank you for joining us in the conversation about the ills of human rights violations. We hope today was an insightful session that will charge our youth and the wider Jamaican, Bahamas, and Caribbean society to stand up. Yes, let us stand up together. Special thanks to the EU Delegation, United Nations Jamaica Multi-Country Office, Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, the Spotlight Initiative, the Ministries of Foreign Affairs in Jamaica and the Bahamas, our youth speakers, Marion, Bethel, technical teams, and of course you for being here with us to lend your voice in the advancement of humans. I am Empress Golding. Walk good.
Yo, brother. Tell me one good thing you do for your community recently. Yo, the man them need to get up off of the corner and do something. Yeah.
Do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, it's your youth, you better do something. Do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, it's your youth, you better do something.
This is no time for fallen soldiers.
This is the time for all to win.
So get up and make the decision
of how you wanna live.
Everybody needs to activate their rights now.
You must know the truth.
Speak your heart and take the right action.
Don't give up your right, it's for you to
do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, you say you better do something. something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, it's a youth, you better do something.
So you build back, make things get out of hand. Sit down on the road like you nah no plan. Say you bun Babylon, bun politician, bun this your man. Learn the use of your hand, shuffle the deck like the 3-card man. Cut the bag of chat, yo, use your hand. Win, draw, lose, straight, yo, you decide who got through the gate.
Do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, youth and youth, you better do something. Do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, youth and youth, you better do something.
Every night and day we are ball about justice. And we same one support the corruptness. Make man kill man till it reach your doorway. At them time they are balling.
So get up and make a decision of how you want to live. How long we gonna live like this, like victims of the system? What we gonna do? Stand by the rules and show we know that young have rights too. Justice, peace, and a whole heap of dignity. That is my right. Standing tall on the shoulders of destiny. Stepping in the light.
Do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, youth and youth, you better do something. Do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, youth and youth, you better do something. Do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, youth and youth, you better do something. Do something, it's your right, you better do something. Make a change, do something, youth and youth, you better do something.